6, 2024. Thank you, community, for joining us online and in person. We are here for the purposes of a Salt Lake City School District Board of Education business meeting. There is a need for a closed session, and I'll entertain a motion from the board.
I'll make that motion. On November 6th, 2024, I move that the board go into closed session to discuss first, the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual, and second, pending or imminent litigation.
Second.
All right, we got a motion and a second. Is there any discussion to the motion? All right, seeing none, we'll start with a roll call vote with Vice President Williams.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Jenny Sika, yes.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Christy Sweat, yes.
All right, that motion carries. We will convene in a separate room and rejoin the community at 6 o'clock. Thank you.
Bye, you guys. We'll be back.
In their unique way, because that's what's really about our culture, is introducing ourselves.
Yate Bobby Smith Yinchia. Hello everyone, my name is Bobby Smith. I'm Miss Pandos, and I'm Navajo. Yeah, thank you. Misha Cho Yinashe. Hello everybody, my name is Misha Cho. Yate, hello everyone, my name is Amira Tree and I'm Navajo.
Yate, hello everyone, my name is Sebastian and I'm Navajo.
Yate, everyone, my name is Naomi Smith, I am Navajo. Yate, hello everyone, my name is Sheree and I'm Navajo.
Okay, and I'm excited to introduce the dances that will be performed tonight. So most of the students here are part of the Highland Native Club, so yay Highland High. But we do also have one student from West High School and a couple other friends who are joining us this evening. So the first dance they will perform is an intertribal dance. The second one you'll see is a grass dance with a fancy shawl to a crow hop song. And then third, our jingle dress dancers will perform a sidestep song. And it is really exciting that we're able to have our students perform, show off their talents, and be with us for honoring American Indian Heritage Month. So thank you for being here, and I'll turn the time to them.
And that was all the music. Yeah, if you guys have any questions or anything, thanks for having us, inviting our students. Yeah, to go ahead.
Thank you. Board Member Anderson wants something to say.
Before they
Students?
leave, I just wanted to say hi to Bobby and Naomi, because I don't know if they remember me, but I remember when they were students at Washington Elementary, and they were in my Tanner dance class, and I wanted to say, we obviously want to congratulate the students, but I happen to know, their mom, Gwen, really does so much work for this program and promoting dance in the community, and so I also wanted to take the opportunity to say hi to Gwen and say thank you very much.
Right. Thank you so much, students, for sharing your culture with us. Moving along to our consent agenda, I will entertain a motion regarding the consent agenda.
I would move that we accept the consent agenda as written, except we would pull item 2.4, positive behavior plans, exhibit 2B4 for discussion.
I'll second.
All right, we got a motion and a second on the table. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, we'll start with a roll call vote with Board Member Sika.
Jenny Sika, yes.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Christy Sweat, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Excellent, thank you, Board. So we will review item 2.5 on the discussion agenda at the end of the meeting. Up next on our meeting, we have our request to speak. The board has asked me to read a brief statement that govern our guidelines for public comment. The board enjoys the opportunity to hear from the public during the comment portion of its meetings. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to remind you of our board rules governing your comments. The total time reserved for public comment is not to exceed 15 minutes, with all speakers or groups limited to 3 minutes. The board will not allow public comments during board meetings that are slanderous, obscene, or otherwise violate state or federal law. Employees and or their representatives may not use the public comment period to address issues that should be raised through existing formal communication channels or established grievance or negotiations procedures. I'd also like to explain that unless the speaker's topic is already on the agenda, state law prohibits the board from taking action on items raised during the public comment period. However, if it seems appropriate to the circumstances, I may direct district staff to follow up with a speaker on the topic discussed. So I think we've only got one of our request to speak speakers here, but I'll call anyway. Board, you should have two written statements or requests to speak that were submitted via text and email, one from Steve Williams and Sarah Nichols. So Steve, I don't see him in here, but I'll call your name anyway. If you are here, the time is yours. All right, I don't see him here. The next speaker on our list is Mike Harmon. Mike, please join us at the podium or at the table.
Good evening. It's good to see you all.
Mike?
So I am just here to talk about policy I-5 and the addition of the wording regarding the late start for high schools. I find it interesting that we've been doing late starts for 3 years, and yet this is coming up now, that it seems to be some kind of a problem. So I'm trying to understand what problem we're trying to solve by adding this language. If we have calendars that were approved last year that met the minimum standard of 1,000 hours, then why is this language necessary? And I understand that, come on, Mr. Showman, you know that can't be true. So when the board, I emailed Dr. Taylor and he was very good at responding, and I appreciate that. When the board made this decision, I understand this was part of the context of the conversation, but yeah, we've been doing it and we've had calendars approved, and now I'm not sure why this is happening, because this time is used for PLCs for the high schools. I think it'd be problematic if we eliminate the ability completely to do early release times for high schools. And I'd like to remind the board that we have agreements of shared governance that these things come through the high schools first, the school communities. And we have conversations. There's conversations right now about this AB schedule, and yet the high schools aren't, the staff isn't hearing it, they're hearing it from their administrators, that we're having these conversations about the static A and B days and things. So I'd like to remind people that we need to go back to that shared governance process, go through the high schools, and then it comes back to the board versus the other direction. So just a thought on that. Thank you very much for your time, and congratulations, Mohammed. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. All right, next to speak, who I also believe is here, but also submitted a written comment as well. Sarah Nichols, are you here? Thank you, Sarah. Come on up. And Sarah, just for future reference, you do not have to submit a written comment if you're here in person, but you're more than welcome to.
The form, like, I couldn't click to the next thing unless I clicked it. We had a form glitch.
Gotcha, we'll look at that form for sure.
Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Sarah Nichols, and I teach academic support at Highland High School. I usually don't use doctor when I introduce myself, or even on, like, unofficial documents, anything like that, because I feel like when I use it, it asserts a level of expertise that's above and beyond that of my peers, my colleagues. My doctorate doesn't necessarily make me an expert in education. What makes me an expert in education is being a classroom teacher for 15 years. This is my 7th year in the Salt Lake City School District. I'm a National Board Certified teacher as well. I'm a member of the Utah Teacher Fellows. I care a lot about education, so thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I'm commenting also on the proposed changes or revision to previous policy, Board Policy I-5, School Day for Students. This policy change would prohibit high schools from having early release days except as approved by the superintendent, but would still allow middle and elementary schools to have these days. This would require schools to hold their mandatory professional learning community meetings before or after school. I could talk about the harm to our novice or younger teachers whose childcare supports may not adjust to an extra hour outside of the school day. And I could talk about all the extra clubs, sports, and activities our teachers already sponsor outside of the school day. I could talk about how mandating weekly 60-minute PLCs violates the written agreement. And I could talk about how this change would undermine shared governance, but I think Mike already covered it. So what I am going to talk about is how this proposed change flies in the face of district initiatives. The very first action step of the very first objective of the very first goal in the strategic plan for student achievement is that by next school year, our schools are supposed to review student data during professional learning communities. Administrators in our district are working towards having effective PLCs by doing a book study of learning by doing, written by the PLC guy himself, Richard DeFore. On page 73, he writes, "Reciprocal accountability demands that leaders who ask educators to work in collaborative teams provide those educators with time to meet during their contractual day. We believe it is insincere," he goes on to write, "for any district or school leader to stress the importance of collaboration and then fail to provide time for it. Prohibiting early release days for high schools means that the built-in collaboration time, already greatly decreased this year due to district demands, would not exist. We would not have the structure to support PLCs and make them an effective strategy to improve teaching and learning. If the board is unclear on the need for built-in collaboration time, I encourage you to grab a copy of that book that I just referenced that all our administrators are reading, or just ask a teacher. Even though not all teachers are doctors of education, I definitely stand behind my peers and their earned expertise on this matter. If the board needs ideas for how to structure and build that time in, I encourage you to look at our district's past structures, at our current PLC structures in neighboring school districts, or the research brief that I emailed you all prior to this meeting. If the board is making this change because someone in legal told you you had to, I encourage you to put this on pause until you understand the requirements and implications of removing collaboration time from our school day. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike, Steve, and Sarah. I know you don't always use the doctor part, so I'll honor that right now. But nonetheless, thank you for joining us this evening. Moving on to our reports agenda. Item number 1 is ESSER expenditure update. B.A. Kearsley, I'll turn the time over to you.
So attached to the agenda is probably won't be the final report, but almost the final report of the ESSER funds. Is the end date for ESSER funds was September 30th of 2024. Can you pull up the agenda? I know you're able to do that, Sam. So I want to note, as it is noted in the cover sheet, so the federal government allowed states to carry over funding from the September 30th, unliquidated is the term they use, if a contract was already in place as of September 30th. So as you note on the report, our main set of ESSER funds, there's a balance of just over $800,000 left. That $800,000 is committed to the HVAC projects that we're doing in our schools for advancing the airflow through our schools. Go to the next page, Sam. And one more. Well, keep going. I may have you go back.
A little further.
All right, so there you see that balance, 851. Again, the projects we have lined up will easily spend that carryover money by the end of the carryover period. And since contracts were in place and we submitted the list of the projects to the State Board of Education as part of the carryover application process, and I have no concerns that the remainder of those funds will be spent by the end of the carryover over project. And you see, we've had these funds for 3 years and a couple months. Everything we've spent in that FY25 column spent to date are one-time funds, computers, software. We talked at the end of last year in the budget season about any personnel that were paid with ESSER funds, and those were all issues were resolved, and there are no more ongoing personnel costs in the ESSER funds, just one-time expenditures. In addition, go to the next page, Sam. The $39 million was the district's main ESSER 3 grant, but there are a few other grants that we did receive that were also from the ESSER 3 Act by Congress. Go another slide, Sam. Is that the last one? Huh. So the other grants are all spent, with the exception we have $11,000 left over in, it's a summer ESSER grant. Particularly, it could only be used for summer learning. There were about $11,000 left over that we're not able to spend, and those will be returned to the state and the federal government. Are there any questions on the ESSER report?
I think my only question, Alan, I know that you've been really good about bringing us, kind of periodic updates about ESSER, and certainly as it moves out of existence, so to speak, post-pandemic life. What are our next steps with ESSER? Do you feel like you'll be bringing back another report when all is said and done, or is this kind of it for us?
I think when we hit the final liquidation of that $800,000, I'll bring a final we're all done report.
Okay.
Just to kind of close the loose ends on that one.
Cool. Thanks, Al. Any other questions from the board? Board Member Jensen?
I just appreciated the report and the opportunity that I had to just visit with you and have you answer questions that I had. Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, we will move on to our discussion agenda. I do need to go back and make a small correction that SLCSD is represented tonight by Tom Luthi. So thank you, Tom, for being here. Let's see.
No, it's Ashley from.
Ashley. I'm sorry, Ashley. I saw an email and I went with it. Nonetheless, our discussion agenda, the first item is policy I3, optional special programs. Superintendent, do you want to introduce this and have Ms. Kindle, I'm assuming?
Yeah, General Counsel Christina Kindle is going to present on these follow-up report of the policy subcommittee.
Thank you, Ms. Kindle.
Good evening, everyone. So, Board Policy I3, we were attempting in the subcommittee to make some clarifications as to what is considered a school-based program and what is considered a district program. There's been some confusion in the past, and this was something we tried to clarify as part of the school closure process. And we created some definitions, if you'll remember, in those rationale documents. We were trying to incorporate those definitions in the administrative procedures and also the idea of providing for a biannual review of all special programs so that the board can understand how they're performing and ask for potentially additional information. So the changes in the policy, it looks like a lot of red, and obviously it is a lot of red, but the idea was to break out the differences between the district programs and the school programs, and to not say anything that would be confusing, and then to refer people more to the administrative procedures for that. My understanding through Dr. Tiffany Hall is that there has been significant communication with schools about these differences. They're all fully aware of it in terms of how they're running their programs. And so when this was talked about at the board policy subcommittee last month, we needed to put it on a discussion agenda item so that the whole board could understand the purpose of it, because there had been significant changes. So I'm happy to address any questions, or board member Jensen can also speak to anything that happened in subcommittee if I perhaps misstated it, or Vice President Williams or board member Zika.
Of course.
For Anderson?
I have things to say about this because I, initiated a request that we look at the APs. So I appreciate all the work that's gone into adding some clarity. And so just to give some background, I've had a lot of back and forth on these procedures, and the reason I requested their review was some confusion in my community about what is a school and what is a district program as defined in the past. And that's because I think in all of our precincts, we have a lot of different specialty programs, and they all run a little bit differently. And it gets challenging when things are not clear and we don't understand what board directives were for programs that were established long ago. It also means that schools with programs have often had differing levels of support. Sometimes we get the information, sometimes we don't. And again, some of those very long ago board directives were no longer clear. So with that background in mind, I think the most important thing to address is that the biannual review is probably the most important component of this. And I appreciate the policy committee adding it. And I would ask, if Brian had thoughts about how we would make sure that procedure is implemented. Like, how do we know when it's on the calendar? Do we know when it comes at an effective time in terms of staffing, right? Because these decisions about optional special programs would impact staffing, so I don't know if that was discussed. Another thing to talk about is how the policy committee came to agree on these definitions for school and district programs. So we have documented clearly in this meeting, what is the criteria for which kind of programs fall into which definition, assuming that, there were programs at schools that have been dissolved and there could be new programs that are created, and how will this policy be able to adapt to accommodate them? And the last thing I thought we should consider is that perhaps in the APs, or perhaps just in language, we should talk about how this would necessarily link to school leadership and performance. So the APs as written talk about the oversight of teaching and learning, and they're clearly poised to make academic decisions for students. But if I was an administrator who was looking to expand or dissolve a program, I would likely do that with school leadership during staffing and not with teaching and learning. So I'm wondering if there's some clarity about what the role of school leadership, if any, there would be in the policy. So just to reiterate, that was three things. One, did we talk about when that biannual review would take place in context of the academic year? How did we come to agree on what those definitions are? So if there was a new program, what would be the criteria where it was placed subsequently in the policy or AP? And then, what is the role of school leadership and performance?
Would you like me to answer those, or would a subcommittee member like to answer those?
I think that you can answer it, and I'll add my thoughts as well.
Okay. I think in terms of the biannual board review, we discussed placing it no later than March 31st, so that it would be very early in the spring to allow us to talk about any expansion or any deficiencies or any other data that the board would like, so that there would still be time within that current school year for those concerns to be addressed. And Business Administrator Kersley can indicate when staffing decisions are made. I'm not sure how that aligns with that.
Yeah, staffing usually, we get the projections end of February, so staffing kind of happens end of February through March.
So again, this is no later than March. If we can, I think the board is trying to build a calendar for when reports would annually be on there. If the board wanted it sooner, we could easily make that adjustment because it does talk in terms of no later than March 31st. In terms of school leadership and performance role, in ensuring that these procedures are followed and how that works. If there was ever a concern that a school had not followed these procedures by going through the requisite approval process, or then school leadership and performance would automatically step in if those concerns were brought to them and talk to the principal or administrators about that and rectify it that way. I will say that mostly, well, any of our administrative procedures that put requirements or guidelines on principals, those are always handled through school leadership and performance. If we have a concern with regard to non-compliance or enforcement or lack of clarity, school leadership and performance through the area directors would always step in and address that. That's not something that we outline in our administrative procedures because that's just standard working practice. In terms of I think your second one was creating new programs and wait.
So what was the criteria for what is a school program and what's a district program? Because you list it with some flexibility, so obviously any new program or a dissolved program could be added or deleted from the policy.
Correct.
But if there was a new program, how would we know to expect where it would fall? Like, is there a criteria for the definition?
Right, so I believe my understanding of whether or not it's a school program or a district program, one has to do with whether or not there would be significant district oversight, whether the district would be providing staffing for that, whether the school would be expected to run the program out of its existing current staffing allocation, and whether or not the district was in effect creating the assurances on behalf of that and whether or not we were funding the program. So there's a funding and a staffing component as well as a more direct oversight and responsibility for assuring how the program was run. So if the school was going to not get any additional allocation, that they were initiating it on their own with their own staffing, no resources required from the district, that would typically be a school program. Clearly, if the district was going to be running the program, managing it, ensuring that a curriculum and model was followed and we were going to allocate resources to that program, those are the things that we would be looking at as a district program. So currently, right now, as the definitions say, dual language immersion programs are magnet ELP programs. Those are all district programs that we support that way. When a school has chosen, for example, to do a CNA program that has sometimes been expanded or eliminated, the district has not allocated additional staffing resources for that. Those are school programs. They would continue to be school programs. So I think that was really what we were looking at. The AP placement capstone, the IB programs, those are all school-run programs that are still considered administered and fully implemented at the school level. So I think that's how we're making the distinction, whether or not the district would be providing funding and staffing and significant oversight. Does that make sense to you?
Question about that? It makes perfect sense to me. The only follow-up question I have would be about an instance where a program like a DLI site started as a school-based program that did not have extra support, and now we're saying all DLI programs are governed in some way by the district. Is there a distinction there about how that's changed?
I believe that the DLI, it is true that we used to have some discrepancy between our DLI programs, and that was really how they were run and the model that they were using. We had some DLI schools that were following the state model that we were providing assurances on and had greater oversight and control over the curriculum they were using. One of our schools chose to not follow the state model and how they were implementing their DLI program. But once we had decided that DLI programs would be considered district programs, we discussed it with that school and worked with them to get onto the state model. So now there is consistency across that. So if we decide that a program is going to be a district-sponsored program, we would make sure that there was consistency in how they were running across the district, and we would no longer have that discrepancy or disparity. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Of course.
Could I interject?
Of course.
Okay. Another thing that might give a little more clarification to that, Ashley, would be down in section 2C, we did add an additional explanation there that if you had an SBD that's considered a special enrollment program as defined in the Utah Code, then you're going to follow all of those requirements. So, I mean, that gives
Yeah,
you
that's
another
good.
explanation of what those SBDs are.
So,
Ms. Kendall? You good?
I will say that the special district programs that require us to follow the relocation provisions are just two programs that are clarified in state law. So that is very specific to those two particular programs that are special enrollment programs. So it is possible we would come up with a special district program that didn't fall within that rubric.
That makes sense.
Are there any other questions from board members?
I have one question that I'd like the board to think about. So when we were establishing that March deadline, I mean, we were trying to do it early in the year, but then there was a little bit of a conversation of, do we want them all like in 1 year, or do we want to have it be that we're half and half, okay? And to me, that needs to be thought about, because I can see where there's some benefits in doing that instead of, every 2 years, we're running through everything. So do we
May I
need to
ask a
have
question?
Lisa?
I have a feeling that half and half is going to be more effective because it'd be more achievable in the context of our meeting timeframe. But my question would be, does the policy subcommittee need to go back to add clarity about that in the AP? Or is it possible that that's simply operational, that it's managed in some way? Because this goes back to the root of like how when we have confusion and things are unclear, that's when we get into problems. So is it worth kicking it back to explain that it will be on a biannual basis, established in some way? I mean, we can say it now, but then 20 years from now, someone will be trying to find the
Where
recording
that's
of
written
this.
down.
Yeah, exactly.
We could put that in the AP, right? To put a schedule of review that way with the programs.
Oh, for sure. And I think the idea would be that with the flexibility built in that no later than March 31st, we could divide it up over certain meetings. It wouldn't have to all be in one meeting. So
Would you rather do that on a single year, like every second year, or do you want to take some of them 1 year and some of them the next year?
I've said enough of my opinions, so I will defer to the remainder of the
We
group.
can take this back to the policy committee, but the APs need not have board approval, so we could look at the policy generally tonight and then ask for those changes. They could go make those changes, and then that would sit for the APs,
I think that's
whichever you
good
land on.
governance to do it that way. I think that's good governance.
Okay, and is there a preference? Sounds like there is a little bit of, maybe not doing all of the reviews in a single year, but
And I would like to point out that the subcommittee discussed the idea that this specifically says the board will receive the report no later than March 31st. So we weren't exactly always contemplating doing an in-person report in a board meeting. We had talked about whether or not we could provide written reports to the board, and then the board, if they had any concerns about a special program, that we could put that on the agenda. So the idea of staggering reports, if you were thinking it was going to be a lot of time in board meeting, I would indicate that this doesn't require a board presentation. So we could give you, the board members, written reports, a written report about it, and then if there was a concern, then we could do a presentation on a specific program. So we would be able to provide that written report in 1 year. Does that make sense?
I think that a written report is good, but I also think that when you're thinking about March and you're thinking about your budget time, that if there is anything that comes up with specialized programs, or if there's any changes that are going to impact the budget, that would be a time to do have an in-person, report about any changes that might impact the budget.
So I'm sensing that a lot of the changes are more within the APs, the administrative procedures, and that the board could potentially feel comfortable moving this to discussion, or moving this to action tonight, knowing that the policy subcommittee will be reviewing changes to the APs at their next meeting. Does that sound good?
Yes, that does.
Right,
Oh,
I just wanted your input.
I'll entertain a motion to move this to the action agenda.
So, I'm sorry,
Oh,
can I
please.
just say one more thing?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So if you want to get into the practice of hearing something for the first time and putting it on the action agenda for the first time, then go ahead.
Gotcha.
For me personally, I don't advise that. I think that it's good for the board to hear what the changes are, the recommendations from the policy committee, and then talk about it and then bring it back. I think that it's important that our public hears you do that. You are the policymakers of our district. And so, you know, to be able to hear some of the things that Ashley said tonight or the other things that were recommended, that would be me personally. But go ahead and entertain a motion.
I serve at the will of the board, so.
I'm sorry, Nate.
No, it's all good, Christy. It's very, very helpful. All right, well, I'm not hearing a motion, so we will move on to item number 2, policy I-5 school day. Assuming, Ms. Kendall, that you'll still be here with us for this discussion.
That is correct.
Great.
Obviously, the change to I-5 is that second paragraph. The reason that it was placed into board policy was the fact that it was brought to our attention, the superintendent's attention, my attention, Business Administrator Kersley's attention, that the board had passed a motion in 2021, and that motion read, a motion was made to accept Interim Superintendent Madden's late start implementation recommendation, including high schools starting at 8:45 a.m. and ending at 3:15 p.m. without early release Fridays. The other schools starting at 8 a.m. or 8:45 a.m. and adjustments may include early release time once a week as a possibility for elementary and middle schools through shared governance and collaboration with school leadership. And then the motion was approved on a vote of 4-3. So it was brought to our attention that this motion and the board's action on this motion was not being followed. And the question was, why wasn't this motion placed into policy, or the applicable policy? As is clear, not every board motion is placed into board policy, but when this was brought to our attention, we thought we could place it into the policy. Board Member Sweat and Board Member Sika were both here when this motion passed, so they can speak to it. The understanding of what this motion was that at the time the motion was made in 2021, high schools were only having early releases on Fridays, which was why the motion talked specifically about prohibiting early releases on Fridays. And the intent of it was that if you were going to implement late start for high schools, that they would not have early release days. That is why the language is slightly different, that it said the board prohibits high schools from having early release days except as approved by the superintendent. The subcommittee recognized that this year the calendars for the high schools have already been circulated and approved, which do have multiple early release days. We wanted to allow the superintendent to have the flexibility of still allowing the high schools who had a published calendar to keep some or all of those early release days this year, because that's already been in the works. But we also wanted to recognize the spirit and follow the board's motion as it was approved in 2021. So that is the reason for it. We're just trying to comply with a board motion that had previously been made.
Board Member Sweat.
Go ahead, Jenny, you had your hand up first. No, you go. I probably have way too much to say about this, so.
Go for it.
I think that it's important to know how we got to this point with this policy. And, you know, it wasn't just an arbitrarily conversation about let's go ahead and have late starts with high schools. It was a 2-year conversation. There were town halls. There were multiple shared governance committees. Principal Chatterton led the shared governance committee that actually made the recommendation to then interim superintendent Madden that was brought to the board and then discussed. So that shared governance committee was the one that actually put all of the information together and then presented it to the board after we then had multiple town halls that we went through. So that would have been Jenny, Mohammed, myself, and Nate.
And studies too, lots
and
of
what?
studies. We studied it.
That's right.
extensively.
I mean, it was, studied the heck out of it, you know. And so I tend to want to hold this policy because there's a couple of things that I think is important. That it wasn't just about the late start. It was about the bus schedules and how the schools started and ended and making sure that we had enough instructional hours. But also interlaced into that had been happening is we had already been doing late starts on a Monday so PLCs could be held. And when the conversation was done during this time of deciding whether or not we were going to implement, those PLCs were brought up. And because we were starting at 8:45, there would still be time in the morning for those PLCs to be held at the school as they had been done in the past. And so I guess that I want to know first how the genesis of this happened. You know, superintendent, you know, how did we disregard policy? You know, and a very, as my colleagues know, a very long conversation about what that day was going to look like. How did we have so many early release days then be implemented? I think you said up to 31. And how did we get to that point? Also, as we've already heard tonight, that the PLCs are being held on these early release days. Is that in fact happening at all 3 of the high schools? And how often is that happening? And is it all See, there's multiple questions that happen from this, which is exactly what happened during that time when we talked about late start and how it was going to be implemented. So I believe that when the recommendation came from the shared governance committee to interim superintendent Madden and then to the board, all of that was interlaced into it. And so I feel like I want to put a hold on this so we can do a little bit more investigation, get a little bit more information from the schools, you know, to really understand, are the 1,000 hours being met? How many, you know, how many days do you think you need to have, you know, next year? I guess if the schedule is set this year, that the board could say, fine, you know, it's set for this year, but what does it look like next year? How many early releases do you think you need to have? Because I think that it would be disingenuous for this board to put inside of a policy arbitrarily saying, here, superintendent, you can choose whether or not they have a release day or not. I don't think we should ever put her or him or them, she, whatever, you know, superintendent into that position today or in the future of being able to say, well, you get a release day and you don't. You know, that it would ever come to that, or a special, you know, oh, I think we need this superintendent after the schedule has already been set. So I would rather us craft something that didn't have that in there, that just plainly says, if the 1,000 hours are met, these are how many release days, or you define that the PLCs are gonna be held in the morning, as they were before we even had late start. That would be my argument for holding it. Back to the subcommittee.
Oh, I was just gonna say, we were 2 of the 3 that said no to this policy. And so, of course, I would like to hold it too. To do a little bit more, because you guys, we got new brains on the board, so, and new circumstances, dynamics that are going on that may look different. So, I don't know.
I was next, so I'm just gonna say it myself. Okay. I think a lot of important things have been said, but I wanted to raise too that I think my concern about the policy is not what we would have to do to be in compliance with the original motion, but about what that process would be for establishing early days. Like, I think it is challenging when the discretion is one person's, because I would think a better procedure would include steps of how schools would obtain approval, especially because we have them for elementary and middle school. So having a different process for high school seems a little bit unclear to me. And the more, I mean, we had a lot of challenges with looking at the calendar, or not the calendar, what am I trying to say? The change of the school day. And when we didn't have clear parameters for how to evaluate changes to the school day, we, entered some conflict. And so I think the more clear that is, the better. The only follow-up question I have is, that was the original motion. Obviously, we could reconsider that. So my question to everyone would be, is it more valuable on some level to reconsider what we say about early days, or is the best way to do it in the policy? I think the best way to do it is in the policy with a clear procedure and say, these are the steps for, getting approval for an early day, and talking about going back through some of those documents, like what was discussed in the committees, because I understood too that PLCs were held in the morning on the late start days, when late start was the equivalent of early release. So there's a lot in the mix, and I think we kind of need to look at what that means and make sure whatever we establish has clear steps, so that schools are never in confusion that, just one individual is gonna decide their calendar, basically.
Let me mention that in the policy committee, the reason why we altered the motion to give the superintendent the oversight is that school calendars are always approved by the superintendent
Right.
first.
Yeah.
Which is not that a single individual is making discretionary choices, but there's a process through the system, and then the superintendent approves as a final piece to that. The other was that we recognized that the motion didn't allow any flexibility. The motion said there were no short days, no early release days, and the purpose of putting that in was to allow schools the flexibility, not to give the superintendent greater power to distinguish necessarily, but to then allow a little leeway on that, because there are days where it's valuable to have early release days. I do think, Christy, your remark about the history of this, and Dr. Taylor is excused this evening, but, and he would know better, especially since I came in after the fact on all of this, but that over the years, the number of release days that have been added to the calendar without much consideration beyond that have exploded over the years, from what was a handful to then 17, all the way up into the 30s now, which I think is not only an issue for the PLCs, which weren't happening in each of those release days, and we have worked hard on that, and schools have been great in putting those in those days, but also I think with families and communities around being out of school that often. So there's a lot of, like you say, workings on these and how that works. But I wanted to just give a little bit of that background about how we got there on this particular policy version when it landed with you.
Board Member Sweat?
Just to follow up, thank you, Superintendent. I think that, that it's wise, to always have both sides of the coin, that everyone understands what that process looks like, what goes into it. I do think that what helps us govern our district well is when we do have things clear. Sometimes it seems to be clear as mud, but I think the more that we can refine this policy so that there's a process, that can be clearly defined, that would be helpful, going forward. So I think that this has been helpful for me in a lot of different ways, but also to be able to really be thinking about that as policymakers, how do we help, processes be clear so that there isn't any confusion.
Any other questions from the board?
So, Nate, are you looking for like a recommendation? My recommendation would be to send it back to the policy committee and have some more conversation with the superintendent, with our policy director, to see if there's something else that they would like to bring forward, and possibly look at some of that historical information. And then, like as Jenny said, what's happening in the schools now and what are the needs, superintendent, that could be built into that conversation.
That works for me? Works for you, Superintendent, and the
Yes.
board? Okay. All right, we'll move on to item number.
Dina?
Thanks,
Thank you for
Christina.
that direction.
Moving along to item number 3, fall enrollment report follow-up. I know we had a very brief kind of introduction to this agenda item that we ultimately pushed due to timing. So Superintendent, I'm assuming that we would still have Sam Quantz come up and give us a more in-depth kind of dive into what we're looking at as far as fall enrollment for this year.
Yes, and Sam has, I appreciate there've been a number of questions after the first presentation, and Sam has worked to pull this together. So I'll thank Sam for pulling that together and for, again, giving us a hard copy, which is invaluable to be able to see and look through and see these numbers. So thanks, Sam.
I just needed to make sure that this came up on the YouTube stream, so. All right, thank you, everyone. Glad to be back here. I think that my last time was about 5 minutes. I'm going for 4 minutes and 32 seconds today.
I don't know if that's gonna happen, Sam.
It's probably not. Okay, so the last, you now have this hard copy of the final numbers that we have. We've kind of formatted, and you brought your ruler. We've even made it bigger than last time to be able to follow. So I'm going to I walked through this quickly last time for your sake as well, and I'm going to walk through it again today and talk a little bit about the process. What you're seeing on your screen is the report that is publicly available. Obviously, these forms that you have are on the board meeting agenda. However, we do have a public website that lists these demographics that's interactive as well. And just to show you where that is, if you hover over schools on the district website and then come to district demographics, and then there's the 24, 25 demographic reports, and that will bring up this report that you see here. And each of those, every school is collapsed. You can open up the schools to see different programs that are available in there, and you can sort based upon whatever you'd like to see. So the first report that you see is just a summary report. It's meant to give you a quick snapshot of all of the preceding or following reports. And we've had the question about every year how many languages are spoken in the district. It fluctuates somewhere between 80 and we've been even over 100 at times. This year we're up at 91 languages. The next page talks about the breakdown of enrollment by grade level. Now, I want you to think of the October 1 report kind of like a rodeo or the wild, wild west. Because out of the 3 main reporting periods, this one is the hardest. Simply because we have so much going on at the beginning of the year. We at least introduce over 1,000 new kindergarten students. And there's a lot of data elements. So we submit data every day to the State Board of Education. And every night we get an error report saying they're missing a language, they're missing a zip code, they're missing XYZ. And so I want to give a shout out, and I didn't get a chance to do this last time, to my team, Christy Rogers, Veronica Garcia, and Tracy Bushman. All worked very hard to help prepare these numbers, whether it was Christy helping schools correct errors, Tracy working on addresses, and Veronica working on the data inside of PowerSchool. And then I take them all and compile this into these reports. So you can see each of those grade levels is broken down. And then the last column, any column that says SE, is self-contained special ed. It's not a total look at all of our students with disabilities, but it's our self-contained. And part of that is when we look at the State Board of Education reports, those are separated out because of different funding streams, okay? And I think last time I talked about this, from the enrollment perspective, a couple of key items for you to note is we're down about 577 students from last year. Please remember that last year we reported Salt Lake School for the Performing Arts. This year we are not reporting for them, so that's about 160 student difference. The middle schools are down about 76 students, and the elementaries are down about 70. the majority of our decrease was found in the high school level, and particularly in grades 9 and 10. The next one is a 5-year enrollment report, which you'll see, that one's not in this public report, but it's in the attachment. If you look at that 5-year enrollment report, that is just to allow you to see how the trends have gone across the top there. And it looks like when we flip this to print it, it scrunched the elementary schools up at the top a little bit, but, and in the grand totals. So that'll show you every year, for example, back then, in 2019-20 had 450 students, where today this year they have 381. Okay. And that will show you that comparison. I've got another report that's gonna help you see that as well. The next report is our English language learner report, or multi-language learner report. And that is, I'm going to switch to that one here on this screen so individuals at home can follow along. You can see the first column is the October 1 enrollment. FLOAT stands for Primary Home Language Other Than English. And these are students that have either, there's 2 questions during registration that account for this. What is their native language, and what is your parents' primary language? And there's different kind of wording from time to time, but that's where we look. And if either of those are any language other than English, they're considered a FLOAT student, okay? And that's used to identify students that may need additional help in learning English. Now, some of those are parents that you have one parent that speaks fluent one language and another parent that speaks fluent English, and so it's really not an English language learner situation. So those students are screened, and you'll find them over in the far column that says FLOAT, not ELL, not English language learners. Okay, they could be a bilingual family, but they're fluent in English. And then the breakdowns of the different levels. Fluent in monitoring, once they attain a status of fluent, they're in monitoring for 4 years, and that shows those number of students there and the overall percentage. In this report, I'd like to bring your attention, Dr. Tiffany Hall and I were talking about this earlier today as I was trying to look for trends. You'll notice that our overall percentage in our elementary schools of English language learners is about 28%. And in our high schools, it's about 26%. But in our middle schools, it's about 38%. I don't have an answer of why, and we didn't come up with an answer of why, but that does beg the question of why, right? What is happening? What are we bringing in? Are there more refugee students? Are there other factors where we have on a percentage basis?
Because I mean, that just seems really unusual to me, that in the middle of all of this, it makes that jump.
Yeah, I think there are some things that need to be studied further about that. I can't give you an exact answer. It could be as simple as we have some students that are in charter schools or some other location or wherever, and they might come back during middle school. It could be, are we screening differently in middle school than we do in elementary? I don't know what the answer is, but those are possibilities. The next report is our minority report.
Sam, before we
Yes.
move to that, I'm going to ask Principal McKinney if you might have an idea of why that is, given that you are the principal of Glendale Middle School, which has the highest number of ELLs in our district for a middle school at 60%. Do you have a sense at all? I put you on the spot that way, which makes it a little difficult when you don't have these numbers perhaps right in front of you.
I've been looking at the numbers because I think that the drive to support language learners is one of our biggest.
Would you mind coming to the mic so everyone online can hear you? Sorry.
That's what you get for being the SLCSD representative for the evening.
I
have been looking at the numbers because our drive to support our language learners, we want to be very intentional about that and our concern with how we staff those classes, because English language development classes, we know from research, are best staffed at about 15 students per teacher per hour, and that is not the same as what we do for our other classes. So how do we do that intentionally without draining our other teachers? So we've had a lot of conversations about that. I know very little about the whys because I'm still very much learning the Glendale community. I feel very lucky to be there. It's a great place. But I do know that we registered about 48 kids. We discussed this in our meeting earlier. We registered about 48 students in January of last year. And of those, about 70% were refugee students. So when we're looking to prepare for that influx, we're preparing for a January, which isn't necessarily reflected in our October count, and preparing to clear classrooms and create more empty spaces of classrooms so that we can support the influx that we will see in January. And I don't know why that pattern does exist, but I know that we've seen it and that in the last couple of years, and we are now preparing for it again. So.
Thank you.
There would be maybe a suggestion, which is that we are working very diligently to get our students to pass WIDA. And I don't know where, the WIDA exam, and I don't know where that would then identify them as language learners when they go to high school. So if we serve them from kindergarten through middle school with those English language development supports, are they graduating and then no longer determined to be a language student on these data when they're getting to high school, which would then increase the
And maybe moving off in elementary, moving off through middle school.
But then if they join.
Okay. Thank
So-
you. Thanks for giving a try to that answer. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And that's some great information as well, when you're looking at this report, is that a student, once they are tested and deemed fluent, they're in monitoring for 4 years. If they continue to be fluent through those 4 years, they become former ELL. And that's what the second to the right column is.
The other thing, I'm sorry to interrupt, but when you study language development, you know that a student that enters not as a refugee would typically graduate from like an English language development course in 4 years, but there's always the added year for refugee students. So if our community is getting more refugees, we are going to see that added year that might bleed into middle school that wouldn't exist in other communities.
Thank you.
All right, the next report on there is our minority report, and we stay pretty consistent in this report over the last few years. Overall, our total minority percentage is 60% of our demographic, which is a little bit of an increase from previous years, but fairly consistent in that area. And then if I can turn this one, we'll go to our low-income report. Okay, so this is based off of a student that is identified as economic disadvantaged, whether through the National School Lunch Program application process, through direct certification of federal or other government programs, or identified in other ways. So we break out, the predominant method though is the free and reduced lunch application. You can see that this year we have increased about 3% from last year. One of the factors with that is an increase in our schools that are considered CEP or community eligible provision. I hope I got that right. See, Kelly Orden will probably correct me from afar. But so those schools are, if they meet a certain percentage of direct certified students for free and reduced lunch, they qualify to have the whole school receive free lunch. And because of that, we don't have all the students apply, and so you look at, we're given a percentage by the state that says this is kind of where the average is in this area for this school. So you'll see those reported as 100% because we see those there. So that number is probably slightly lower than 56%, but not lower than last year's 53%. Then the next report is I'll jump back this way on the screen, is our homeless report. And I work with Mike Harmon on this, and whenever I have something wrong, he tells me, and so I appreciate his help on this. It'll show you where we have students who they complete the McKinney-Vento form that talks about their living situation, and if they meet one of these criteria, then they are have access to resources through the McKinney-Vento program. And that has stayed pretty steady over the last few years as well, a little bit of a slight increase. And we'll show you that on another report. The next one, I should have gotten you.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes,
now?
absolutely.
So that McKinney-Vento report, are there families or individuals that may not be filling that form out?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, we've worked over the years during our registration process to try and really invite that, but some choose to answer differently.
Yeah, I mean, that's my experience, so I think that you do have to keep in mind that it's probably a little greater than this.
Right, right. And then we would probably have that with some other factors too. Like the next report here is the language report. Sometimes we do have students that report, the parents choose to report English instead of some other language for one reason or another. But for this report, I should have brought you a magnifying glass as well, so I would just recommend you look at it online in the District Document Center. But this is a total of the 91 languages that are spoken throughout the district. To fit it on one page, it had to shrink, so. But again, online, you can look at that a little bit more closely. The next report is the distribution report. This is a report of students that live in a school's boundary, how many of them attend their boundary school, how many of them attend outside of their boundary, how many students attend that school who have transferred in from a different boundary. So as you look horizontally, that shows you everyone that lives in, that has transferred in to that boundary. So if we look at the first line, Backman Elementary, we have 252 students that live in Backman's boundary that attend school at Backman. But then if you go over to Escalante, we have 12 students that live in Escalante's boundary but transfer into Backman. Then if you read vertically, we have 252 students at Backman, but then you have 18 students that transfer out of Backman and attend Escalante. Okay, so you would have, out of those with Escalante alone, you'd have a net loss of 6 students out of Backman's boundary. And so that's what this last column is on the gain loss. Out of all the students, did the school have more students transfer out of their boundary than transferred in from other schools?
I have a question about this table. So I've gone over this every year, and it's something that especially before the school closure process was initiated, as schools were, concerned they might be recommended for closure. This is something that like SCCs would pore over. But the thing that I don't have the raw data to do is I guess I'm curious if there are consistent trends. Because if fewer than 10 students went from Franklin to Washington, that doesn't really mean anything to me, specifically in 1 year. But if over the course of the last 10 years, the same number of students are consistently going from one school to another school, I would be more curious about why that is. So my question is, can this be analyzed in such a way, knowing the complexity of this report, that is it possible per school to identify if they're, and kind of model what some of the trends are? Does that make sense?
That is a great segue to the next page, Thank you.
You're welcome.
If you look at this, and it is a big data set to try and look at that kind of individually. So what I did on the next one was give you a 5-year gain-loss comparison. So, and then the last 2 columns are an average gain or loss for that school. And I did 2 years. I did a 4-year average prior to school closure, and then a 5-year, knowing that the school closure and boundary change really kind of throws things off. So if you look at any of those schools that are in orange there, if they are consistently in orange across the 5 years, we consistently have more students transfer out of that school than transfer in. And then you can look at the last 2 columns, which give you the average for that. Now, whether that gives you everything that you hope for out of this, it's at least a start to see, to ask questions of why are we having our students transfer out of our boundary?
Exactly.
Is it because of they're going into magnet programs? Are they for, there's a number of reasons that could be, but it prompts the question for sure.
Well, I guess I would just give as an example on that next table, like if I scroll down, just for instance, to Rose Park, and I'm not making any interpretation of this, it's just an example, that the numbers leaving are relatively small, and then there's a huge jump. And so that's where the geography component may be helpful, because I'm asking these questions that I don't have the answer to, which is, did those students choose not to go there because they were assigned there, and they chose a different school when, you know, boundaries were realigned as we closed elementary schools? Like, some of those huge changes, the geography component would still be helpful to understand.
Right.
So perhaps not, you know, if you are, like, I'm just gonna pull another example. I'm looking at Emerson's numbers and they are consistent and I see no orange. I may not want like more analysis of that. But some that have had no, you know, consistent, like Franklin had only gains and then has a big loss. So I'm curious how school closure impacted some of those jumps one way or the other.
Right, and you are probably accurate on, like the Rose Park, that was probably a factor of a boundary change more than anything. If you look at Whittier, for example, they have, on that 5th year, 137 students that transferred out. And however, they do have the magnet program, so as you combine the magnet program and the regular school program, that actually kind of balances out and gives you some of that answer.
That also had a change with school closure. We changed their
They did.
boundary.
Yes.
So the
Can I
students
say-
who maybe had been assigned there chose to attend a different school than
I
what they were
promise that
assigned to.
I won't just go back and forth, but I guess the reason why I'm bringing up that Rose Park example, if it was impacted by closure, that's something that we need to consider if there are future boundary study recommendations. Because if 159 students are not, you know, cooperating with the existing boundary, perhaps the boundary is the issue more than what students are doing. So I think that the information is helpful in the sense that it could guide future decision-making if it is large numbers not doing something in the boundary. Do we accept that all the time, or do we look at like what the more natural boundaries are that people self-selected on some level?
Christine?
So I'm just going to echo something that Ashley just said, is that if I were looking at this as a parent, or if I were trying to explain this in an SCC meeting, I would probably have those same questions. So Superintendent, I'm wondering going forward, as you look at this, and knowing that there's still going to be, you know, that fluctuation in enrollment, to have a note out to the side, you know, that says, even though it's in orange, as Sam has pointed out, but to say why, you know, to look at that trend and to have some sort of notation there, so that not only is it in the minutes, but it's also a part of the conversations that we're having in the school community councils. That, because I am asked for these all the time, you know, in the past, you know, they want to see these. Sam readily now shares all of these with principals, as we just heard, you know, our principals are doing. But have some notes out to the side. Maybe this looks a little different, you know, if there is a boundary change, or if there is a drop in enrollment, or if kids are migrating a different way, or maybe possibly there's a program that's not there anymore. Whatever it might be, I think it would be good for us to start tracking those trends.
And one of the things that I've done with Brian Conley on my team is we've talked about these areas of anomaly as he's looking at boundaries and planning, to assign that to him to research a little bit further, because they're not the answers are always found in a spreadsheet. They're found by talking with individuals and finding out a little more. So, the next spreadsheet is average class size per grade level. This one, because of the way we have some classes configured in our student information system, classes can be broken out into multiple sections just for administrative purposes. But in reality, you've got one teacher that teaches X amount of students, right? So that's what this shows. This is average per teacher per grade level is what you see there in those schools. And then the next report, I included this one. The secondary one is still in the big spreadsheet because it's a lot more pages than this. This one's about 4 pages. This one is average by homeroom type and program. So a standard general education homeroom would just be labeled homeroom 1. That's grade 1 homeroom, okay? Or homeroom kindergarten full day versus AM, PM. Our SC homerooms are labeled as self-contained. And then you can see if the homeroom has students that are part of a magnet ELP program or DLI or CNA, those are listed in this report. Okay.
Can I ask something about these? This is the last section I think I have questions about. The first is I wanted to offer a clarification for anyone listening that if you looked at the CNA class sizes, you might say, why is that so small? And it's because when Sam's pulling it out of Power School, it pulls 5th grade separate than 6th grade, but in fact, the class is 5th and 6th grade. So those classes are not, like 12 and 10. They're 22. It took me a while to do that math. Okay, but my question is, when I look at the specialty program class sizes, and this is kind of a question for everyone on the board, we were asked to vote on a Washington pilot program for magnet ELP services, and there were concerns about the class sizes. But as I'm looking at class sizes of other ELP programs that are comparable, and I abstained from that because I was a student in the program, but as I'm looking at the other ELP class sizes, many of them are as small, if not smaller than the pilot. So I'm asking the board, where do we land with this concern that we voted not to renew a pilot because we were concerned about class sizes, but we're seeing those same class size discrepancies in many of our programs, with some less than 10. So this is not a question for Sam, it's like raising a question from what we're presented with, which is, at some point, will we take a look at that and also some of the implications of that in terms of, I'm curious from a financial perspective, how we are funding things outside of the FTE equation and how specialty programs are able to do that when classroom programs and neighborhood programs are not. So I just think this raises some concerns about, we've made decisions in the past, they are related to what I'm seeing here, and I'm wondering how we as a board move forward with studying some of these issues. Because no one said anything, I feel like my time still goes. And I just want to point out that parents do pay attention to this part. That I will get, a boatload of emails, which is why I'm raising this, that, you chose to do X thing, but then you allow that thing to happen elsewhere. So why did you do that? And I don't have a good answer, because, I abstained, and then we also don't get to review these programs. As we just talked about, they're placed by the school district. It's a different thing. So I just think the last piece is that as we as a board decide how to look at some of this information, we also have to recognize that parents do pay attention to these tables when they come out, and school community councils definitely pay attention to them.
Christy?
So, Sam, I'm so glad that Ashley peppers you with questions, that it's not just me over the years. So Superintendent, I think that there's been some really valid things that have been raised tonight, in regards to class sizes. I think that one of the things that was an early learning for me was how a master schedule is put together, and they're complicated, especially at the high school level. But then I also realized that, sitting in listening to how a master schedule was put together over at Highland Park, it's just as complicated at times because of the programs that we have and different things. I think that one of the things that's come out for me as I look at this and I look at some of those class sizes, it always just rings true that they have to be sustainable over time. How are we paying for them when you only have 10 kids or less in a classroom? We know that at a high school level, you can't have 10 kids in AP class because it impacts core classes, you know, across the district, or I'm sorry, across the school. And so this could be a falsehood in my head, but because we made a commitment that we weren't going to RIF any of our teachers when we had that, when we closed 4 schools, and we've had to find places for everybody, is that also a result, you know, of these smaller classrooms? Is because we've got additional people, you know, teaching in schools, and the possibility of that happening. And over time, will that dissipate? You know, will we see the classes grow a little bit more because either someone will retire or they'll take another job or whatever the case may be? So I don't know. I mean, those are some of the questions that run through my mind, you know, as we're looking at this, because as I look at Nibley, I can see where the bump was, you know, where because we added, you know, the 2 programs there. We added teachers, you know, we added all of the things that we needed in order to have that be sustainable. But I do question when we have classes that are that small, let's say 15 and smaller, in those programs, how do we sustain that over time? And also, you know, be able to explain to our parents that maybe in a bigger class, you know, that the resources are being directed in a smaller, because we already know that smaller classrooms, you know, generate a different type of atmosphere with kids. And anyways, those are some of the questions that this has posed to me, Sam, as you've given us all of this really great information, and seeing that, you know, over the period of time, that the only reason we see bumps in schools right now is because of the school closure and we moved programs, but most of the schools have seen a decline in their enrollment. And so if we make a decision as a district that we're going to fund and go below, as you said, Ashley, below that ratio, then how do we sustain that, Mr. BA? You know, I mean, that's something that I think that this board's gonna have to continue to talk about.
I think the class size is a really very legitimate and important and very difficult conversation to have, because there are such discrepancies. And teachers notice these discrepancies too. You know, they're recognizing that their classrooms are of very different sizes. And it's a challenge that we have not had an easy solution to in most of these instances. Because to create a split classroom out of some of those would make it too large, and some would be too, you know, you get into all sorts of machinations. But I think it's one to put on the agenda to talk about, because I do think it's important. It's an inequity in this district across schools that way. I think it's important to see. Let me mention one more thing, and I'm going to turn to Logan. If I remember right, there were just a handful of teachers that, was it 6 or so, that were not placed right away in open classrooms once school closure happened. I don't remember the number. Did I get that wrong or right, Logan? Just to help Christy with that question, since we have you here.
Absolutely. No, the correction I would make to what you said is that there were 6 that we had to use additional funding to be able to pay for. The rest of the teachers from the closed schools we were able to place into open positions. So it really is just a small number of additional teachers that are in schools that might be helping with more of a deflation of class sizes. So I don't think that there would be a substantial change in years ahead as that levels out.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Thank you.
So I just want to interject. I appreciate your comment, Superintendent Grant. Ashley and Christy, you were emphasizing that parents look at this, but teachers look at this really closely too. And when we talk about inequity, I mean, we're talking about that, you know, on a student level, on a teacher level, on a number of different levels. So to me, this is an important area of discussion.
All right. The next report in there is the pre-K enrollment report. When we report our overall numbers, and when you look at the enrollment numbers from October 1 at the State Board of Education, you won't necessarily see pre-K included in that. That's a separate funding stream as well. So we add this in to show we do have 581 pre-kindergarten students in Salt Lake District attending as of October 1.
Sam, if you look at this number, the 581 that you're looking at, is that like a 99% chance that they're all going to come into our schools? That they'll move into kindergarten?
Yeah,
Are you seeing that trend?
That's a great trend. I haven't looked at that specifically, so I couldn't answer it off the top of my head.
That would be interesting to know, to see who we have in our pre-K, if they're moving into our kindergartens. That would be,
That's a great question. I can get that for you. The next report in there is the closed school transfer report. Where did they go, right? You can see that as of October 1, about 156 students did not return to Salt Lake City School District, but out of 1,000 students that were in those schools. So I left the middle schools in there so you knew that fifth grade students at Riley, they went to Glendale, or sixth grade students at Franklin went to Bryant, just so you could see that movement. But then you can see just across the board, K through whatever their top level was, what school they went to in the other elementaries and overall. So still, the majority of those students, and one thing to note, these are students that were enrolled as of May 15th, 2024. I didn't go back and say, okay, as soon as the vote was made, how many left, or anything like that. We just looked at those students that were kind of stable population in those schools and how many we retained. Okay.
So it looks like, Sam, did we lose 15%?
What's that? We lost about, about 15%.
15% of the students?
Yep. Looks like I've got some duplicates in here on this one.
Can I ask one
Okay.
more question
Yes.
about this? I lied. Of the students who were not enrolled that we lost, can you just clarify for me? You're only talking about students we lost who were previously enrolled outside of our boundary? Or you're talking about students who were enrolled in the boundary and then we lost?
Right,
Or
so-
both?
So for example, if you look at Riley on there, as of May 15th, there were 41 students that were enrolled at Riley, but as of October 1st this year, they were not enrolled in any Salt Lake City School District school.
But you don't know, and this does not track, if those students were perhaps coming from Granite District to
Yeah,
Riley.
Yeah, I mean, I could look at if those 41 students lived in Granite District.
I
could
would be
see
curious about that,
Okay.
specifically for something like, if I look at Mary W. Jackson, I think, well, were they DLI students who did not return but were coming for DLI from out of boundary?
Yeah,
That is a very different nut to crack than,
Right.
students like leaving the district who've been there for a significant amount
that
of
is a great question. I can look that one up.
Sam, is there also a way to know, to track where those students have enrolled, whether or not they're in the Utah system or in the Salt Lake Valley, or we get a lot of turnover in students, particularly in some of these schools, just by people moving?
Yep.
Could some of that number be attributable to that?
Yes, yeah. So we can
Is
look
there a
up,
way to find out?
yeah, I can look up students where they enrolled kind of one by one throughout the state. If they haven't enrolled in the state, I don't have any feeler on that. I reach out from time to time to the State Board of Education to receive a report of how many students are that live in Salt Lake School District boundary but attend other charters. I reached out, I haven't received that quite yet from USBE for this October, but that's another place. I've tried to see if we can get like exact students, that's a student data privacy issue, so we don't always get those released, but these ones I can look at.
Do we have a sense of how many students move physically out of the district each year? Do you have any idea of that?
Not off the top of my head,
Okay.
but I can find that out.
I don't know that that's worth it. I was just wondering if there was a comparison for this number.
Okay. All right, the next report that I have for you is this. This was an add-on that I just finished up this morning. That was based upon a question from, I think, Board Member Anderson, that wanted to looking at all of this data as a whole what trends do we see? And so the first side, it says the 5-year, and actually I have it here so I can show the audience there. The first side, it says 5-year school demographic enrollment trends. Now, this is over the from the 2021 school year to the 24-25 school year, October 1 counts. You can obviously see our enrollment trends overall has been declining. The next little dashboard there, the enrollment by grade level, this is a total number of students that have attended over those 5 years. So you can see that we receive an increase in our high schools, 9th, 10th, 11th. That grows significant over every other grade level. Part of that, I believe, is because when we look at, we've been able to identify that we have charter schools in the area, we have private schools. Some of our students go there, but they're not always K-12. So when they hit 8th grade, they come back into our schools, our comprehensive schools, for various reasons. The next pie chart gives you a breakdown of our ethnicity and race, and it shows pretty much what you might guess looking at our student enrollment. You can see in the next little, on the bottom left in that chart, that our multi-language learner enrollment has increased. I think from last year, the overall enrollment was about 2%. And so that begs that question, where are our English language learner coming from, similar to what we talked about with middle schools. The next dashboard shows how our students with disabilities have increased over time as well. And I think I have a number on that here. Yeah, the percentage of students with disabilities grew from 12.3% in 2020 to 21 to 14.9% this school year, demonstrating that positive trend. And then you can see our low income, that percentage of low income students has fluctuated. So you can see in that 21-22 school year, we had a decrease. However, that was right during the middle of COVID. So applications and so forth, plus increased, contributed to that. So then on the next page, on the next side, this is a draft. It's kind of a conversation of the different district programs and school programs. We've been working on cleaning the way that we report the data over the last 5 years. For example, our multi-language learner programs rules have changed kind of each year. We're given new rules, and so we try and report. So we're trying to keep everything consistent. So the top two charts are what we deem district programs. So Magnet ELP, DLI, and the Magnet ELP International, that DLI combined. That will show you those breakdowns over the last 5 years. Then we look at what some might call a district program, school program. AMP is in there, that's a district program, but I wanted to include that. One thing I want you to notice on the AMP, there looks like a decline this year. There's not a decline this year, it's just a coding issue. We haven't flagged everybody in our student information system yet. That usually happens a little bit over time, so we're just a little behind in coding that. You can see our participation in CNA up at Ensign Elementary over the last couple of years. Last year there was a little bit of a decline, but that has bounced back. And then our IB participation, you can see there was a slight decline. This could also be a coding issue. I'm still looking through that one. For the 23-24 school year, there's a big drop there. And then AVID participation in 22-23, that drop, I believe, is a coding issue in our student information system. I checked this data a couple of times, and I just believe that we did not flag our students in AVID for that year. We can go back and try and fix that. It's a little harder to in retrospect. Okay, those are all of my reports. And is there any other questions?
I have a question on the first report, because when we started, weren't asking question, and then it kind of evolved into asking questions, so,
Is that on the summary?
yes. On that summary, over in the last column, when it's talking about special ed or SE, and you said that's self-contained, correct?
It's the SC, yeah.
Okay, so when it says, I just want to make sure that I understand this. Okay, let's take, I don't know, Franklin Elementary, for example. There's 43 there. But then if you look over at, let's see, I think it's Liberty, there's 0. So is that because self-contained, the students are being sent to those other schools where there are so you're not showing that the student that lives in Franklin, you're showing them over, do you get what I'm saying?
Yep. So the SE is our self-contained
Okay,
students.
right.
We consider that their boundary school because it's a hub school. And so that's where we have placed them, right, as an organization. So that's why you're seeing it in that school. It's not showing up at where they might actually live.
Yeah, okay. I just thought that would be helpful for the public to understand too, because when they're seeing, well, how come there are 45 somewhere and there's 0?
Yes.
They're being put there.
Strategically, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Any other questions for Sam?
I have maybe it's an irrelevant question since Logan answered, maybe. So Superintendent, on the form where we just had Sam go through with us that said that we had 156 kids that did not attend Salt Lake City School District. Would that, because as I'm equating that, and I'm just thinking, that's probably 6 FTE. Are we overstaffed because we planned for the number? I'm just trying to wrap my head around that because if that plays into that.
The low class size.
The low
piece
class
again.
sizes and then also if we have 156 kids less and that maybe equates up to 5 or 6 teachers, and it could be spread over obviously, the 20 plus elementaries. But are you seeing that we're overstaffed in any of our schools because of the projections?
I've not yet had a principal complain about being
Well, no, I don't think they would. You're not gonna get that at all. But that always comes up, and.
Right.
Because then you
I
might have to
haven't seen
adjust it
that.
next year.
Logan, do you have a picture of this at all?
I think that's a difficult question to answer because schools with their discretionary funds, additional funds through any title programs and things like that often put those additional monies into additional staff. And so you can see a large reason for the difference in class sizes from one school to another can vary greatly based upon whether or not they're using Title I funds to purchase additional FTE for teaching, or if they're using those funds for ancillary support staff like paraprofessionals or office staff to help out in other capacities. And so different schools will use their additional monies to do different things with that, but primarily if they can, they will hire additional teachers to help lower class sizes. And so that's a common feature we see across all schools. But when it's not available, when they don't have enough funding to hire additional teachers, they will hire additional ancillary staff as well. So I think whether they're overstaffed or not,
It balances.
I think there's a balance. What you're seeing with the class sizes on Sam's report is largely a measure of the base funding is at the board approved allocation ratios of 1 to 25 in the lower grades, 1 to 28 in the upper grades in elementary. But our class sizes, as you can see overall, are much lower because there are additional funds that schools put in to help
do
decrease
that.
those even more.
Okay, thanks, Logan.
You're very welcome.
Okay, so then my last question is on this on this really great informational sheet that you have. And I might have blinked out when you said it, so just, if you already said it, just, I'm sorry that I'm making you repeat it. But there is a trend up in our homelessness enrollment. Do we know why?
Yeah, I do not know why. I might ask Mike Harmon.
Mike?
You do have an expert.
I was side talking. I didn't hear the question.
Mike, do you know why there's a trend up in homelessness?
Yeah. Affordable housing, right? I mean, we're seeing more and more families being priced out of being able to live in our city. And so more and more families are not able to afford housing in the area, and there's less opportunities for affordable housing. So that's why we see those trends going up, absolutely.
That are going up. And so most of the students are in Salt Lake, right?
They're staying in Salt Lake, so by federal law, they have the right to stay here.
Yeah.
And so many of them, because they love our schools, they may end up with relatives. You'll see a majority of our students, I think it's like 70% of our kids double up with other families for economic reasons. So they try and stay as long as they can in those situations. But we're also seeing our shelter numbers go up and our car park and campground numbers go up.
Okay.
So more people living on the streets, living in cars, parks, and campgrounds.
Thank you, Mike.
Absolutely.
I think one of the reasons there's like an underlying question a reason why I asked that is because I think that that's obviously what we've been seeing.
Right.
And so do we need to address the resources that we're putting towards helping our families who are homeless?
So we absolutely have done that, and I really appreciate the board. So I take this opportunity to thank you for the advocates. You know, during ESSER, we hired 2 additional advocates, and then we've been able to maintain those, working with Title I, to keep those 2 people full-time as well. So I'm only part-time now. We have a full-time liaison, and then 2 advocates working with us as well. So we do have additional supports to help support our families and students, and it's made a world of difference.
Okay. I think that it's something we need to keep watching, Superintendent. I think that especially as we know there's going to be changes in our city and what our families are going to be,
Absolutely.
especially our families that are home insecure and
that
food
bridge, for sure.
insecure, you know, that we need to really make sure that we're watching those trends closely and making sure that we continue to have the resources that we need to help support them. Thank you,
Yep,
Mike.
thank you.
Thank you, Christy.
Ashley?
Okay, I would just,
Ashley, then Brian.
I just wanted to centralize 2 things, and one is that as I was listening to the discussion, I wanted to clarify that I don't think anyone here is advocating for super large class sizes.
Yeah.
We're talking about a discrepancy between less than 10 and like 26 in the same grade.
I agree.
And so no one here is saying, just to put a fine point on it, you know, we want to stack them deep and teach them cheap. We're saying that also, is there a class size that is too small? Like, we all know that certain class sizes are too big, but less than 10 students provides a lot of difficulty as well in alternative ways. So just to clarify that, as we're having the discussion about normalizing our class sizes, we're talking about maximizing our programs and serving students the best we can. We're not talking about, you know, not reducing class size. We don't want to do that. But the last thing is that we've talked about so many topics that before we conclude and move on in the agenda, I do want to say the focus on trends to me is the most important thing, because I think we need to establish the next time we'd like to discuss some of the issues raised here tonight, because we've identified different things that we need to talk about, but we haven't said what is the next step in talking about that and what is the context in which we do it. For instance, would we go through a portion of our strategic plan to ensure we're looking at, you know, services for students experiencing homelessness? Or would we want to discuss having a study session regarding specialty programs that relates to this OSP conversation? Like, what are the next steps we have based on the many myriad things that have been identified?
while Mike was up here, I just wanted to ask for a clarification. You were talking about the families that were living together. If I was reading it correctly, it looked to me like that was increasing as well. And I guess I'm drawing on past experience in classrooms. I think that you have families that are related and things like that that are now joining together as well. Are you seeing that?
We are seeing a little bit of that, but
Okay.
typically we'll look at who's on the lease, right? So which family is supposed to be there and which family is staying there. We have seen some situations where families will rent an apartment, two families together. And typically that would be enough space for them all, right? Mohammed talked about that before, that sometimes if a family of 4 is in a 2-bedroom, some of us may not think that's okay, and other people think it's perfectly okay.
Right.
So we let the family kind of decide that, but if both families are on the lease, then they aren't McKinney-Vento, right? But if one of them is, and the other one's just staying there temporarily, so it's temporary due to loss of housing or economic hardship, then they would be considered McKinney-Vento.
Okay, I appreciate that explanation.
Absolutely.
Another issue that's causing increase of homelessness here in our city is, sadly to say, is like other cities are encouraging, their homeless people to come to the city, to Salt Lake City, because they tell them there is more resources. And this is an issue, sadly to say, that is happening from the legislative level. Yes.
But we're not really seeing that with families.
Okay.
We're honestly not. The families that we're seeing are typically families who have been here. So we're not seeing an influx of families. We have seen a few newcomer families to our country that will show up, but usually they're coming on their own. They're not being sent by another city or something. So for our individual families, we're not seeing those big influxes from other states.
Okay, so then it's probably just on an individual person, being moved from one city to another. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mohammed. Thank you, Mike. Any other questions?
Thanks, Sam.
All right.
Thank you. That was more than 4 minutes. I think it was all
There
really
goes my
bad.
Christmas bonus.
And I knew it was going to take
Christie
this
called it,
amount of
that's
time.
for sure.
Sam, thank you for putting all this together.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sam. All right, moving along to our next agenda item. Item number 4 of the discussion agenda is the 2024-25 board calendar. This is something that Vice President Williams and I felt like it was important to discuss with kind of current issues that we're talking about publicly, as well as in closed session. We felt it best to bring the potential of a new board meeting or an additional board meeting in December to manage some of the things that we have on our calendar, knowing that we pushed a couple of agenda items back, which is kind of making our December 3rd meeting agenda potentially a little bit heavier or with more items than we had anticipated. But nonetheless, we wanted to bring it to you. It's not a decision that we've made without you, so we wanted to float that idea. And then we also wanted to propose to the board that we adopt July 17th, sorry. June 17th as an all-day retreat, so that we can anticipate that, schedule for it in our personal lives, work schedules, and all of that. So we have that expectation for the summertime.
I'm free June 17th.
I've already shared that I'm not available.
I know you are.
Hi, Christie.
Jenny votes for that one too.
We're great with that day.
I shared before the meeting that I'm not available on that date, but I also think it would be beneficial to wait until we have a new seated board to determine dates, because we don't know their schedules or availability. So I think that that's not, it will be most beneficial to do with a new board.
Duly noted. That still leaves the question of an additional December meeting. Looking at the calendar with the board's kind of holiday party and the holidays, if we're sticking to Tuesdays, the 10th would be the most logical or ideal day, unless we want to look at days outside of Tuesdays.
I'd rather have it sooner than later.
Okay. Does the 10th
10th
work
is
for
fine.
folks? Okay. Cool. Well, we, now that we've discussed that, I would look for a motion to move.
Nate, may I ask on the time then, that we move the board social, or it becomes a
No,
before or
no.
after event,
So
or?
we're suggesting that we have an additional board meeting on the 10th
Yes,
and the board socials on the 17th.
I see, thank you.
It is, to the superintendent's point, in the calendar as the 10th. We all have it in our calendar as on the 10th.
Yeah, we'll
The
move that.
invitation says the 17th, so.
I believe
Yeah.
I believe at some point we did discuss moving it to the 17th.
I'm not saying we didn't, I'm just pointing out
Yeah.
that it still appears there, which is why that
it's
needs to be
held.
fixed in
That's
tandem.
why I asked,
I see what
yes.
you're saying.
I'll
Thank
move
you.
it right this moment, how's that?
Perfect. Nonetheless, I would look for a motion to move 2024-25 board calendar to the action agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All right, any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, We'll start with a roll call vote with Board Member Anderson.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Mohammed, yes.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Christie Sweat, yes.
Bryce
Jen-
Williams, yes.
Jenny Sika, yes.
All right, that motion passes. So Superintendent, if you could work with your team to get that posted.
We'll
and
update your
everything,
calendars.
updated everything.
I
Thank
just
you.
got something that
It's
came over.
updated.
Yeah, something just came in.
It just came out.
Perfect. Thank you, Helen.
Ellen, you are quick.
Excellent. So now we will move on to the action agenda. We have one item on the action agenda, item 2.4, which is positive behavior plans. This was moved through a motion by Board Member Anderson. Would you like to make a motion so we can further discuss this?
Oh, what, you want me to move something about it? I just have questions about it before we make a motion. So when I had pulled it, I said move it to discussion. Is that not?
Oh, you did, didn't you?
I said discussion. The agenda says
Yes.
moved from consent to action. So if we need to
So we
clarify
will-
that in the minutes, you can clarify.
No, we will
But-
keep it on discussion, so we're still there.
I'll say the reason why I wanted to discuss the PBIS plans, which, for anyone who didn't know, the legislature requires a positive behavior plan be produced in compliance with ostensibly an anti-vaping bill from several years ago. And those, the legislation funded some costs for personnel stipends for producing the plans, but each school only receives $1,000 per plan. So I said this last year, I've asked periodically throughout the year for information on potential changes we could make to this, because what I notice when I review the plans is that they cost substantially more than $1,000. And we are sending a message to the legislature that with $1,000, we're able to do this, 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 and this, which in fact is not true. Most of it is funded by our general budget, and the $1,000 is a very small portion of what schools are submitting to us. So I have no problem approving the plans as a compliance measure, and I want to, honor the work schools are doing, but actually what I would like to do is find out our options for reducing the efforts required by schools. And this could be in alignment with the School Board Association Push-Pause initiative of when we have mandates that are not just unfunded, but very underfunded. We're asking schools to do a huge amount of work every single year for not enough money to do that work. So my question essentially is, one, does the positive behavior plan in fact have to be this comprehensive, or does the law only require that we say what we do with the $1,000? Because to say what you do with the $1,000 is a lot less than what's being produced. The second part of the question is, depending on what the law requires, and the answer to that, a lot of schools repeat the same interventions year over year. So is it possible if schools have no change to their plan from the prior year, they can resubmit the same plan with approval from the SCC without modification? And both of these questions are an effort to reduce the burdens from schools and also signal that we're not being funded to do the quantity of work that is being described in these plans.
Ashley, from what I understand, there are only two requirements in the law, and they have to do with input into the plan. The plan is based on input of students, parents, and staff, and the plan is submitted to the board for approval. I think what has happened over time is the board has asked for things. There may have been a simple structure to begin with. I know the board asked for the references as part of the plan, and also there may have been some additions over time. But I do think the template itself, or the request that we make of schools, could be much less. I think they have also, though, with they have moved beyond the law and now are speaking more broadly to all of their positive behavior plans. Whether they're part of the law or not, they're a way of recording for the district what they're doing in each school along those lines. We could either break it out or make different kinds of plans that come to the board for approval. We could do a number of things, but could come to the board with some options for that.
In that case, I mean, I don't know if other people wish to discuss this, but if that is what is required, I would suggest that we move to approve the PBIS plans as posted on the consent agenda and simultaneously direct staff to look at options for revising the plans in collaboration with administrators to think about options which could be presented to reduce those burdens.
I would second that motion.
I may be corrected here by general counsel. Let's get a reading on this.
Additionally, we're not on the action agenda, so I did it wrong, but.
I just want to say that there is a requirement in the law that the
So it may not be a burden, but Board Member Anderson's comment has more to do with the representation of all of these plans as part of something related to $1,000 granted by the state.
Exactly. So in that case, could I still, I mean, we could still direct that it gets looked at, right? And we
Yeah.
consider this template is good, but there are other things we could do or not do. Because if we can't do it, you know, we can't do it. But I'm most interested in this idea that we're sending a message that $1,000 produces this, when in fact $1,000 does not produce this. So I would more specifically say that we should move the PBIS plans to action simultaneous to some direction to staff to look at the requirements of those plans.
Do you need a second? Second?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought I had.
Yeah, Brian seconded.
Okay, I'm just taking my notes real quick. All right, we have a motion and a second on the table. Is there any further discussion while I move this to action? Okay, seeing none, we'll start with a roll call vote with Board Member Bade.
Mohammed, yes.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Christy Sweat, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Jenny Sika, yes.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes. All right. So technically, the first item on the agenda is the calendar. So I would entertain a motion from the board that we adopt December 10th as an additional board meeting to our board schedule in December.
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote, starting with Board Member Jensen.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Christy Sweat, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Jenny Sika, yes.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Mohammed, yes.
All right, and now we're on PBIS from the discussion agenda. I'm sorry for the confusion there a few minutes ago. Board Member Anderson, would you like to make the motion?
Yes, I would move that we accept the PBIS plans as posted on the consent agenda and simultaneously direct staff to look at some compliance issues and template options to reduce burdens for schools.
Second.
We got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we will start with a roll call vote with Board Member Sweat.
Christy Sweat, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Jenny Sika, yes.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Mohammed, yes.
Brian Jensen, yes.
All right, that motion carries as well. Moving on through our agenda. Alan, do you have a BA report this evening?
Yes, I do. First of all, I would like to thank the board for putting the bond on for special election yesterday. And I would like to thank the voters for approving said bond election. And we are committed to building schools that this community is going to be proud of. They're going to be happy to have in their community, and we're going to serve our students for decades to come. And I also want to note on that lines that I've now dubbed the pink jacket the bond jacket. So every time we pass a bond, I will wear the pink jacket. So if history stands in maybe another 25 years, I'll don the pink jacket again.
I told him it was.
You'll be buried in that jacket.
I told him it was like his Mark Eubank jacket.
Right. Some people have snow jackets, some people have bonding jackets. So I did want to report, the Utah Association of School Business Officials held their fall conference a couple of weeks ago down at the Canyon School District. Some of the things we talked about, we did have a presentation from Alpine District about their split that was on the up for election yesterday. We had some updates from the State Board of Education, just, boring financial updates I'm sure you're all super excited about. They also asked me to present to the group on how the downtown revitalization projects are affecting the school district. And clearly that conversation focused around tax increment financing and how that is diverting potential property tax growth revenue that could come to the district, otherwise to these development projects. And I just want to share with you, if I have it here. Sam gave me too many papers. All right, I don't know where it is. But so last year, we had about $30 million that was diverted with tax increment financing to, and that actually goes to various different agencies. You know, it goes to the Salt Lake City RDA, it goes to the Inland Port, the hotel down there by the Salt Palace, also is funded partially by tax increment financing. And then as these other new HTRZs and so forth come online, that will be another entity that diverts those tax revenues that otherwise could be property tax growth for the district. So just sharing that report with you.
Thanks, Al. Superintendent?
Sure, I want to also say thank you for the bond. I've had a chance to go visit some of the new schools near us, and these new high schools that have been built recently and that we're looking at as models for our schools. They are beautiful. They are beautiful learning spaces, and they create different kinds of dynamics in the schools with the way that the classrooms are set up and things. I think we'll be excited about what we're able to create with this bond. And also really want to thank the Salt Lake City community for supporting our students in this way so generously to support this bond and let us move forward with these schools and with the updates that we have there in the bond. So a huge appreciation to the community and to our friends of the bond committee who participated in supporting this, and then a shout out to Alan, of course, and Yandri Chatwin, our communications director, who both of them took the lead in making sure we were getting all the steps accomplished to complete the bond, to get it out there into the public, and also shout outs to them for the great work in getting that done. I have also, I am just thrilled that we have Mohammed here again, and Bryce Williams. We forget that he was also up there for election. He won with an outstanding amount of the vote. 100%. Also that we are actually ending the tenure of this board in just a couple more meetings, which will certainly change my life, having only known one board in my life. And we'll have time to celebrate you and spend some time doing that, which is valuable to do. But also to welcome 2 new board members in January, Amanda Longwell and Charlotte Fife Jefferson. So excited to work with them and have a new board come January. So a lot of changes here in the district. Let me give just a couple of announcements on happenings in the district. First, I had the chance today, and it felt good this morning, of all things, to be out in schools with students, and had the chance to visit a handful of schools actually this morning, but particularly went to Meadowlark Elementary. Our teacher there, Rochelle Stewart, received the Utah State Board of Education Science of Reading Award for the remarkable training and instruction in the science of reading for her students. Called out for that, as well as 2 students at Backman, Debbie Palm and Elizabeth Halloway, Liz Halloway. Shout outs to them for receiving this Utah State Board of Education Science of Reading Teaching Award. And Matthew Teeter, our principal there at Backman, also received an award as the Science of Reading Principal Award. And just really a thrill to be in schools today and looking at the future through our children's eyes and what we're trying to accomplish with them, and shout outs to the teachers. One more note of business. In our Title IX report, we report to you about intramural fees in schools. Hillside Junior High, middle school. I'm of an old age and I still call them junior highs. Hillside Middle School was reported at the time not to be charging fees. The challenge has been the intramural program has become so popular that they actually had to bring in more staff to help support it. And because of that, increased participation and having to hire more staff, they have had to move to a fee. However, they are waiving the fee for eligible families, as we do all the time. So I just wanted to note for you, you had seen that report in the Title IX report, and this is a change a little bit that came because of the popularity of the program and having to bring in extra staff, so I wanted to alert you to that.
Thank you, Superintendent.
You're welcome.
Board member reports. Board member Sika, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I also just want to congratulate those who won their election yesterday, despite it who you voted for. It was a great experience for me and my family. I have quite a few kids who have are first-time voters, and it was a sight to see. A sight to see them be involved in democracy and be involved in change. The little things that I have done hopefully have influenced my children and my posterity to continue to move forward and make such changes and let their voices be heard. And I just wanted to share that sentiment, as this is my second to last meeting.
She's not kidding.
And congratulate my, what do you call her? I mean, successor. I almost said predecessor. Successor, Charlotte Fife. She's gonna be awesome. She's been in the community for quite a bit, and I have confidence and faith in her work and what she could do for our community. But I'm so happy. I'm so happy for, democracy, and I just wanted to celebrate that despite whoever you voted for. It's a good day to be an American. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank the community for giving me another chance to serve for another term. Words are not enough to express to you the gratitude and placing that trust in me. And as always, my promise will always continue to be about ensuring that the voices of the voiceless are always heard, and equity will always continue to be, brought to the front, and teachers will always continue to be appreciated in district and make sure they are taken care of as well. So with that said, words are not enough, to thank everyone. Also, while I'm at it, thanking all of those that sponsored me and those that stood and distributed signs and you name it, just thank you. With that segue, yesterday's election was a rough one. My kid this morning, they got up and they were sobbing. They were sobbing for, the immigrants. They were sobbing for women's rights. They were sobbing for minorities. They were sobbing for, their dad, whose name is Mohammed, and the challenges, because they knew exactly what I went through going back to 2016. So there are those challenges for sure. And I'm just, all I can say is, may God have mercy, Nevertheless, with all of that, the national and the state policies might be of a challenge, but I always believe the strength that we have is our community. Our community will be able to take care of each other. We'll be able to support each other at hard times and at good times. And that is the only thing, personally, that I feel that we can rely on as we are dealing with these changes. So hug your little ones. Don't be afraid to talk to them about hard things. It is important for them. And I want to also let everyone know that this is a district that accepts everyone, no matter what your belief is or your political affiliation, but there is zero tolerance for any bullying of anyone, no matter what. There's just let me set that straight. And to the community, let me give you my cell phone number, 801-358-0254. And with this phone, if you ever encounter anything that has to do with racism or being, disenfranchised in any way whatsoever, please reach out to me. Please reach out to me. Don't email me. Text me is the best way to get a hold of me. Thank you.
Yeah, a couple of things. First and foremost, although it was anticlimactic, I am very excited to have won my election and to serve another 4 years on this board. My focus forward is, it's going to remain the same, as that we put kids first, and the decisions we make and the votes that I take will be on making sure kids are first. Similarly, it was very hard to get up this morning, but I had the opportunity to join the superintendent, Dr. Hall, Dr. Malouf, and folks from USBE for the special presentation at Backman, and being back in the elementary school that I did my K-6 education in with these special awards for educators was just highly important and memorable, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to have the opportunity and the motivation to get out of bed despite not wanting to do so this morning, so I'm appreciative for that. And I think that's all I have, yeah.
Thanks, Bryce. Congrats, and congrats, Mohammed. Helena?
Just like Board Member Sika mentioned, it was really exciting to see my peers, fellow seniors involved in, voting and educating themselves on candidates' policies and getting involved in the history of our country. It was really beautiful to see, asking ourselves how we know what we know, and I just enjoyed seeing that. Even going to school today, there was a buzz, but it was nice to see kids getting involved, so just appreciated that.
Brian?
Well, I did want to thank the community for supporting our students and schools with the passage of that bond. I'm excited to see what we're going to be able to provide. And then I know we'll have other opportunities to do this, but I did want to acknowledge Christy and Jenny and thank you for your service and the opportunity that I've had to work with you. It's been wonderful. I do have a few things that I do need to report. Today there was a USBA policy webinar. Alan, you were there? Yeah, okay. I thought it was a really helpful explanation of some challenging statutory requirements, and I would encourage any of you that weren't able to be there, you can go on, and it's recorded. You can go on to the USBA library and it'll be there. I will be attending a USBA Board Executive Committee meeting on Friday, and will be representing us and the other large school districts in the state of Utah. I have said this now for the last, I think, 4 board meetings, and your time is running out. Here's my pitch. Master Board certification, it's due December 1st, and you can be enrolled in a drawing, and there's prizes. I mean, it's going to be incredible.
The possibilities are endless.
Endless, you know. Then there is the new Board Member Institute, and I would encourage Superintendent Grant to visit with our board leadership and figure out, I mean, I think it would be beneficial for you to be there. It's December 7th. It's in
Yes.
Provo. It sounds like you wanted to make a comment.
I was just going to mention, yes, we've already invited the new board members to put that on
Right.
their calendar.
And if there's anyone on our board that hasn't had that training, they're certainly invited, and I'd leave that to you three to, if there are others. I just want it to be that it's open to anyone that would like to have that training. Then we have our USBA annual conference. I think you got an email from Bryce saying that Alan needs to know who's going to be there so that we can all be enrolled. I hope that you're there. I think that there are beneficial trainings, professional developments in those meetings. Finally, I want to thank all of those communities that are in the schools that I represent. I had an opportunity of visiting a lot of SCC meetings, and those individuals work hard, and I appreciate the time that they take to ensure that our individual schools are getting their needs addressed and successfully operating. Finally, I would say, and I guess I should have done this when we were on our consent agenda, but there are a couple of areas that I think would be worth considering for discussion in the future, and one of those is our after-school program. And I know that we have made references to that. Some of the board members have made references to this in
I have a tattoo that says it.
Okay, I think you do have that, yeah. I think it would be really beneficial for us to look at that, and I think that's something we need to look at in the near future. When you look at our purchasing reports, we are spending a lot of money in those after-school programs, and I want to know that we're using that money wisely. It's not that I'm questioning it, but I would like to know how that money's being used. Thank you.
So if you'll just indulge me for a few minutes, I think that I had such a great opportunity this past couple of weeks with an SBA, and I just wanted to share with you an experience that we had at our CUBE conference in Las Vegas. And we had these three amazing women of color that were keynote speakers for us. And each of them are parents. They all have had their kids in public schools. And obviously they knew their audience, that it was school board members. And so this is what I think is something for all of us to think about and hopefully make some changes systemically in what I would consider us to be the leading urban district in the state of Utah. So when describing, it was done so eloquently, I'm just gonna read exactly what was said. When describing marginalized students, it's essential to avoid labels that can be stigmatizing, limiting, or that carry negative connotations. Here are some terms that many education professionals recommend avoiding, along with reasons why they should be eliminated or rephrased. At risk. When widely used, at risk can feel like it defines students solely by the challenges they face, implying that they are likely to fail. Instead, terms like students facing barriers or students with additional support needs can acknowledge challenges without predicting negative outcomes. Number 2, disadvantaged. This term can suggest a sense of inferiority or victimhood. Using phrases like under-resourced or from low-income backgrounds is often preferred because it focuses on circumstances rather than defining the students themselves. Low-achieving or low-performing. These labels can harm students' self-esteem and create fixed perceptions about their abilities. It can be better to focus on terms like students with academic support needs or students with growth potential to emphasize potential and areas of growth. And last, minority. While commonly used, minority can be limiting and inaccurate, especially in areas where certain racial or ethnic groups are the majority. Using terms like historically marginalized groups or underrepresented students provides more context and avoids reinforcing outdated demographics. The aim should always be to use language that emphasizes students' strengths and potential, focusing on barriers that can be addressed rather than characteristics that might feel like unchangeable limitations. I mean, there wasn't a dry eye in the house when you think about the labels that we buy into as an educational community and just continue to repeat it without thinking about how that might stymie some of our students. I thought it was so powerful. And then last, there was a battle cry that went out, and I loved this, and it was to board members specifically, that just because you raise your hand to an oath every 4 years doesn't mean that you should forget that oath. That it should be repeated, if not on a monthly basis, but at least often on your board, around your board table, to remind yourselves that
that you are upholding the Constitution and defending it and obeying it. But what the most important part is that you will discharge the duties of my office with fidelity. And when you think about what fidelity means, that it means that you're consistently and carefully looking at the standards or expectations. When someone performs a task with fidelity, they are following the intended guidelines, instructions, or principles closely without significant deviation or compromise. And I just think that's such a powerful statement for each of us to remember, that that oath that we take as school board members isn't just an oath that you raise your hands to after you win an election. It's something that you've promised to do. And so the battle cry is uphold your promises. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Ashley, did you have a board member report?
Nope.
Thank you. I know we've put out a lot of thanks and gratitude to the community. I also want to do the same, just from my vantage point as the board president. Thank you to the Salt Lake community. Thank you to all those that were involved in helping us pass the bond for 2 new amazing high schools and opportunities for our students. We couldn't have done it without all the folks that were mentioned, Yandri and Alan, this board, superintendent, the list goes on and on. Friends of the bond committee, so thank you, Salt Lake City, for that. Again, thank you and congratulations to everybody on the board, everybody that's won their elections. I'm looking forward to working with you for the remaining 2 years of my term as well. But yeah, I'm looking forward to all of this and what we have. Jenny, it's been great. So I know we got a few more meetings left. And Christy.
We're gonna beat you guys Saturday.
Dang, she went there.
Oh, she
went
threw
there.
it down.
Wow,
She
I'm
threw
thanking
it
you right now, girl, like dang.
Oh, my
But Christy, as well, 8 years, or 6 years for you and I that we've been on the board together. So I've learned a ton from you, and thank you for everything that you've taught me. One thing that I want to bring up, just part of just putting it on the radar of the board and for potential discussions throughout the rest of the year. Bryce and I convened a meeting with the superintendent, with the business administrator, with Christina Kindle, and the board's legal counsel, Joan Andrews. We worked to have Richard Stoll there as well, but his calendar and schedule didn't permit for a last minute thing that came up for him. But the goal of the meeting was to discuss what a new board member orientation would look like for Salt Lake City School District and the Board of Education. We came up with a lot of really good ideas. We are wanting to bring this to the board in a future meeting throughout the remaining of the year, or a couple of meetings, so that we can really get your feedback on what we discussed and some potential changes to just our processes, policies, and potentially the board handbook. But I just wanted to put that on your radar so you're not caught off guard when you see that type of agenda item potentially in November or December. But it was a really productive meeting, and I thought that we came up with some really good ideas on a process and even a tentative date that we would invite our 2 new board members to a half-day orientation here at the district office. So we're really excited to share that with you in the future. Other than that, we do have a need for a closed session. I've asked Vice President Williams to give the motion for that.
Yep, so I move on November 6th, 2024 at 8:38 p.m. that the board go into a closed executive session to discuss the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual and pending or imminent litigation.
Second. Got a motion and a second. Any discussion in the motion? All right, seeing none, we'll start with a roll call vote with Board Member Sika.
Jenny Siga, yes.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Mohammed, yes.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Christy Sweat, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
All right, the motion passes. Thank you, everybody.
That's right. You know what, I think it's called